There's an election possibility that I wanted to bring to your attention so that you could properly prepare for it, just in case things reach that level. And with everything happening right now in our country, I'm personally concerned that things are only going to get worse the closer we get to November. And if there's any indication of how things are going to be then based on what we're seeing right now, well, all the concerns I'm about to share with you in this possibility becomes more and more relevant. So having this information can only help you better strategize how to move forward if that starts to happen, right? Now, I do want to mention that Midway USA is the biggest supporter of the channel, and thanks to them, I'm able to get videos out like this so you can be better informed, and then they can help you get better equipped for whatever you need when it comes to your preparedness. So, big thanks to Midway USA. Now, what possibility am I talking about? Well, here's the thing. There's a lot of contention right now in the country, especially regarding different factions, and some of these factions have, well, less than desirable ties. Back in 2004, there was a lot of concern about the possibility of a terrorist attack during the general election on election polling centers. And obviously, this was very proximal to 9/11, so there was a lot of heightened awareness around that particular topic. But because of those concerns, the Congressional Research Service decided to go through and figure out what exactly would happen if there was some sort of widespread or wide-scale attack on America during a general election, and who would have to handle that and what options would there be. So the options are as follows, okay? Congress would have the ability to postpone an election, right? That's the branch of the government that has the ability to do that, okay? The states, through their governors, could also postpone an election, as well as authorize a lot of other powers, of course. And then we also had the option, the last one, which is probably my least favorite, okay? Which I'm stumbling on words today. I'm apologizing ahead of time in case any more of that occurs. Congress could delegate their authority to the executive branch. And those are the three options that the Congressional Research Service basically said are reasonable to assume would occur if that became necessary. The last one being my least favorite for obvious reasons. But currently, and why does this matter? You'll find out quickly, I promise. Okay, currently, states and localities are in charge of the laws surrounding policing polling stations. So we're talking about, sheriff's departments, police departments. Anything state-related is allowed to protect polling facilities and make sure that elections can move forward without postponement if possible, especially if the election centers themselves are the ones being targeted, right? And federal law currently prohibits using military troops at polling sites for obvious reasons. I mean, people don't really like to express their freedom of speech and who they're going to vote for while under the threat of being shot at. Except, because we know how federal laws work, except there is one time where using military troops at polling centers would be reasonable. And that would be unless such force be necessary to repel armed enemies of the United States. And that's according to U.S. legal code. So, armed enemies could be portrayed as many different types of people, regardless of how you want to look at it. I'm sure the government and the executive branch could figure out exactly who they're referring to regarding armed enemies if they so needed to. Now, why does that matter? Well, because of the current environment we're in. And there's also historical precedent for elections being postponed after such an attack. And we know, based on what the FBI has been telling Americans for months now, that we are at the most heightened risk of a major terrorist attack than pretty much we've ever been, even since 9/11. Which, by the way, after 9/11, a mayoral primary was postponed. It's one of the few elections in this country that's ever had to be postponed due to outside interference. And that was, of course, for the New York City mayor. And it was postponed for 2 weeks. So the election was moved from September 11th, which is actually the day it started, and then it was canceled midday because of the attacks that occurred on that day, and then moved to September 25th. Now, that's problematic enough because elections need to happen or else they just don't happen sometimes, as we've seen in other countries. But in this particular instance, you'll find this probably relatively interesting if you weren't aware of it. But in this particular instance, due to everything that was happening and the fact that the election had to be postponed, Mayor Giuliani at the time actually tried to convince Governor Pataki to extend his term using emergency powers. Because, of course, maintaining that leadership position throughout that crisis would be important, according to Giuliani, but also very concerning according to how democracies are supposed to work. Republics, I know. Now, he was denied that, but at the time, it was a request that wasn't revealed to anybody until a couple of years ago. So that just goes to demonstrate that there is a propensity for elections to be postponed in the aftermath of a terrorist type situation. And we also know that those who are in charge might use that scenario as a way to consolidate power. But we're not quite there yet. I promise there's more to it. In response to COVID-19, by the way, many states postponed their primary elections. Many states. And a lot of them also decided that in-person voting was not an option. And mail-in voting was the only option at that point in time. Which means, well, it could shake some of the integrity of the system, or it could just overload those who are in charge of processing said ballots, right? We're just going to keep this conversation in the realm of generally acceptable, let's just say, okay? Now, why does any of that matter? What are you leading up to here, Magic Prepper? Well, let me tell you, okay? We have all these protests going on college campuses around the country right now. They're escalating. There are images of notes and letters and posters and all kinds of things that are inciting escalation, as well as trying to undermine the American way in many ways in what it is they're trying to dictate these people should do to move forward in their protest. And these people that are associated with these groups have been known to protest at polling locations in the past. In fact, just as recently as February of this year. And back in February, Palestinian advocates were protesting outside of a polling station in Michigan during the Democratic primaries there. And they were trying to urge voters to vote uncommitted, which is basically like none of the above rather than choosing Biden, because of their upsetness with the whole support of Israel and the war and everything else going on over there by the Biden administration. Okay, so what happens? And I'm just asking this, okay? Because if these protests escalate, and if things get even more violent than they've already started to become at these college campuses, and we have obviously infiltrated groups when it comes to foreign adversaries from outside coming into this country and instigating these events within our college campuses and anywhere else that they might decide to have events, say maybe a polling station. At what point in time did these events create the condition of unless such force be necessary to repel armed enemies of the US? And at that point in time, if military troops are having to be used to protect polling locations and the integrity of the election, do we need to postpone said elections? And who's better authorized to use the military in that capacity while also postponing the elections? And if Congress was to delegate that authority to the executive branch in order to consolidate the entire situation into a more manageable outcome, well, what does that look like? And how does that spill over in the sense of both sides of the aisle? Nobody's going to appreciate that type of a scenario occurring. Not to mention the fact that it is, by all means, the same thing as voter suppression. Because if you were to put armed troops at polling stations for everyone's security and safety based on the activities of some of these other groups that are currently demonstrating their likelihood of escalating towards more violent actions and their ability to protest at polling stations, well, basically, people aren't going to show up. They're going to not want to show up. You're going to feel unsafe. If armed men have to be here in order for me to go vote, is that going to make me feel like taking the initiative to go out and do so? Now, you might do it, right? I might do it, but I'm saying in general for the general population. And then, how likely are people to accept the outcome of an election where most of the polling stations in the major parts of our country, obviously your more urban areas where there's more people, possibly have armed guards deployed by the military, possibly have postponed dates where people maybe can't make it there at the same time or frequency as they could have before when planning ahead in order to make it there? How likely are they to get out when these protest groups are actively involved in trying to urge them to vote a certain way while also demonstrating a capacity for violence in other areas of their events? These are considerations that you should be making right now because this is a likely type situation compared to something as grandiose as a major cyber attack from a foreign adversary or from a martial law declaration based on a nuclear event overseas or who knows what else, right? There are a lot of things that could affect this election. But this is one of those things that has historical precedent, has happened before in some capacities, and has the ability to escalate things to another level without having any outside interference per se, other than the groups we already have here within the country that are currently demonstrating, right? That's why I want you to be prepared for this now. You should be prepared for not only however you're going to deal with participating in this election, if that's something you're going to do, but also how you're going to deal with the aftermath of whoever feels they were mistreated during this entire scenario. And that's why I wanted to bring it up. Now, I also want to make sure to quell everybody's fears about whatever my alignments might be, right? The flags were removed behind me, not because I necessarily wanted to, and I don't want you to think it changes anything about the way I feel about my country. But I do work here on my workbench. I work with firearms. I work with a lot of dirty stuff that has a lot of carbon and fouling and everything else. And let's just say I accidentally damaged my American flag, and that's not acceptable. So I'm not going to leave it there. It needs to be properly retired. And while it's in process, I have to figure out how I'm going to reset everything up and whether or not I'm going to make changes or whatnot. But I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that because I could see some people getting concerned, wondering what the heck is going on with Magic Prepper. But either way, that flag has to be properly retired now. Nothing else I can do about it. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think this is a reasonable scenario to be concerned about? Do you think it's something you can prepare for in the sense of how that would make things move further forward and how things would be handled during that time? Not to mention your ability to actually get out and vote if that's something that you're planning on participating in. Let me know, because after doing some research and going back into history a little bit, I thought, this is a relevant and possible scenario that could actually happen without it being as grandiose as some of the stuff a lot of people are more concerned about, which in my opinion are less likely. So anything else you need from me at all, go to magicprepper.com. And besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.